Hello and welcome to this special edition of Christian World News. I'm Lee Webb. The Psalms tell us that the ocean depths, lightning and hail, snow and clouds, and the stormy winds do God's bidding. Yes, God is sovereign. He's in control of all that He's created, even in disaster. But He also tells us that He's there to provide comfort when tragedy strikes. Today on Christian World News, hope in crisis, how God's people respond in disaster. We have a terrific panel of experts who have been to some of the worst disasters in the past decade around the world, including the Haiti earthquake, Hurricane Katrina, and the 2004 tsunami. George Thomas usually co-hosts Christian World News, but today we are relying on him in his role of international correspondent so he can share his experiences reporting from disaster zones. Also here is CBN News Chief International Correspondent Gary Lane and reporter Ephraim Graham, who recently came back from Haiti reporting on follow-up from last year's earthquake. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us. And Gary, let me begin by talking to you and asking you, what's the worst disaster you've been to?
I would probably say the tsunami in Indonesia back in late 2004, early 2005. That when we flew over that area with Samaritan's Purse, we saw just devastation I've never seen before. And I've covered a lot of floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, and other disasters, but nothing quite like that.
And I suppose as you see the video from Japan, it reminds you a lot of what happened in Indonesia.
Oh, it sure does. And I think because there's a greater concentration of population there, it even looked worse probably, but I haven't been to Japan.
George, how about you?
Yeah, I was just in preparations for this show, I was trying to remember what was my first earthquake, and it was back in 1999 in Taipei, Taiwan. I'd never experienced anything like this, and the numerous aftershocks that we experienced after that. But no doubt, clearly what happened in Haiti 2 years ago was just we were there about 48 hours after the earthquake, and just to see the extent of devastation. Haiti being the poorest country in this part of the world, and then just to see the bodies that were still there on the streets in apartment buildings, and the sheer magnitude of ache in the people's hearts as they deal with the catastrophe that had
George, you talk about Haiti being one of the poorest nations, certainly in this hemisphere, but natural disasters seem to be a great equalizer, don't they? I mean, even in some of the most populated and wealthiest portions of Japan, they're in the same situation as the folks in Haiti were when that earthquake struck. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think my colleague Ephraim Graham, who's in the newsroom, can obviously attest to this as well. I mean, it is there's no respecter of person, whether you're poor, rich, black, white, it doesn't matter. When an earthquake hits you, and then in some cases a tsunami hits you, I mean, you can do all the preparations possible, but at the end of the day, it affects everybody.
Ephraim, you've been down to Haiti a couple of times now, and most recently to check on the progress. How are the folks down there doing?
Well, unfortunately, I have to say that many of the people are in the same situation they were in when we were there some 15 months ago. Actually, one of the things going on even this weekend is an outbreak of chaos inside a stadium where some 2,600 people are living. And the reason for that is because they would like to get them out of the stadium so that they can start preparing for soccer, because soccer is such a morale booster for Haiti, but they can't do that. The disaster is certainly very difficult. On top of the hurricane, of course, we see the cholera outbreak that unfolded, and then we had Hurricane Tomas that also came while we were there as well. And the epicenter of the earthquake is pretty much the only place that saw extensive flooding as a result of that. So devastation on top of devastation seen right there in that small but very poor country.
Gary, we talk about God's awesome power in these tragedies, in these natural disasters, but you've also covered many wars and seen the devastation that war causes. Is there a difference? Are there parallels?
I think the parallel is similar to what George said. Rich, poor, everyone is affected by war. The difference would be obviously on the medical front, wounds, shrapnel, bullet wounds, things like that. A little different compared to an earthquake or a tsunami or flooding.
You know, it seems to me as we reflect on these disasters, people at the outset really come to grips in a breathtaking way with God's awesome power. Is that right, George?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if you look at what happened in Haiti, I think the thing that really boggled me within the first few hours that we landed was the ability to see people of faith. I think we've got footage of this tent where an entire church community, and I think about 500 to 600 of them, in a moment they lost everything. But then about 3 hours later, they were able to put together a makeshift camp. And within a few hours of that, you could see this, this image of people dancing. And in the midst of unbelievable, horrific death and absolute loss of life and possessions, they found it in the middle of all this chaos to worship God. And I find that very inspiring. It's so inspiring when you go as believers, you go into these situations and you see these kinds of pictures.
Well, let's talk to Ephraim about that. Ephraim, as you know, Haiti, there's certainly a great Christian tradition there, but unfortunately they have a tradition of voodoo and great unbelief. But have you noticed in your trips back down there that the people of faith are getting along better than those who don't have faith?
I will say that is certainly true, but also I'm also noticing a change in many of the people who didn't have faith prior to that. The more I go, the more people I talk to. I mean, just the amazing stories. I met one gentleman who was actually a former witch doctor, and how was he changed? He was changed as a result of two evangelists going out to not minister to him and preach to him, but to see what he needed in order to survive. They would go back day in, day out, and when they said they were going to do something, they did it. What he then turned to them and said a couple of weeks after that was, I want to know the God that you serve, and I want to be more like you. That gentleman is now actually working with that ministry, helping to teach young people how to fish, and just the amazing change in that short amount of time, because he saw God at work in their lives and them being committed to their word. He wanted to serve the God that they served because he knew that the voodoo and witchcraft that he was operating in actually wasn't real at all.
I saw the same thing, Lee, in 2005 when a massive earthquake hit the northwest frontier province of Pakistan up in the Kashmir region, about a 7.8. Everything was just leveled, and this is Taliban country up there. And as relief was being taken in there, people said, you are the only ones that have come to us. You are the true believers because you're bringing aid and relief to us. And of course, we brought Bibles in as well. But they were ready. Their hearts were prepared for the gospel because of the devastation. They were ready saying, we thought this was the end of the world. What does your book say about the end times? And because of the work of the Christians there, 3 imams in that area actually came to Christ. They had to leave the area because, as I said, it's a radical Islamic area. They went to other cities and then were baptized.
You've witnessed that as well, George, I see.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Indonesia, the part of Indonesia that got hit, the northern part of Indonesia for a very long time was closed, not just to the outside world, but to Indonesians. I remember covering an earthquake about 2 years ago in Sumatra, and Indonesians would say, you know, no one ever thought about going to that part of the world, of the country, but clearly when this devastation happened, the entire world flooded in, and so many of them, like Operation Blessing, Samaritan's Purse, World Vision, all of them, they were all Christian-based organizations, and they saw the sea of humanity come into their neighborhood and talk about the changes that had taken place.
You mentioned these humanitarian organizations, indeed these Christian relief organizations that are doing such great work. We're going to be interviewing in our next segment representatives from 2 of these organizations. God has a habit of redeeming that which is lost. He likes to take things that are broken and put them back together again. Please stay with us as we continue our discussion about hope in crisis, the church's response to God's almighty power in natural disaster. Stay with us.
CWNews.org, your constant news source on the World Wide Web. Find daily updates on the global church. Watch the weekly broadcast.
3 former presidents come together to honor the life and ministry.
Also available in podcast. Read in-depth insights into our reporter blogs.
Taliban kidnapped at least 18 South Korean Christians.
Your online news source for complete coverage of the global church.
I want to talk to you for a few minutes about what may be God's best for you.
In the new DVD, The Law of Expectation from Pat and Gordon Robertson, Pat shares the essential truth that enables you to receive the favor of God.
God knows who you are. He knows everything about you. And God says, I love you, and here's what I'm going to do for you.
Pat and Gordon Robertson bring you powerful principles of thought and behavior that can transform your life. Experience the joy of realizing your dreams, the power of finding purpose in your life, and the fulfillment that comes from building a deeper relationship with God.
You'll see prosperity in your life. You'll see blessing in your life. Why? Because of God's favor.
Get the law of expectation and experience the wonderful blessing God has for you. Available now.
And I realized God was saying, look, you can keep doing this your way or you can do it my way. Your way, you got what you got. My way, I can work this out in such a way that it will astonish you. And so I remember saying, look, here's what's left of my life. You can have it. You can trust the Lord and He will do His work in your life, and you will be so glad that He did.
You look at everybody around here, it is more like people gathering on a Sunday, fellowshipping together, almost as if nothing has happened, but a great deal's changed us all. It's all been a blessing.
That's a member of First United Methodist Church in Slidell, Louisiana. Their church suffered great damage during Hurricane Katrina, and I spoke with them just days after that event. In fact, their church was so damaged, as I recall, they had to have their Sunday worship service outside. Also there was Jody Geddes. She is with CBN's relief organization, Operation Blessing. We're also joined now by Mike Beresford of the Rapid Response Team from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. The team provides spiritual care for victims and trains churches in how to give that care. Christian organizations are often on the front lines of natural disasters and ready to help, sometimes even more than governmental organizations are. Jody, that was just a few hours after I had arrived in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, and I was just amazed at the faith that these folks were expressing, almost as if to say they were glad that Hurricane Katrina happened because they experienced a unity among the church they would never have experienced before. Is that the kind of response that you hear a lot of times when you respond to these things?
Definitely, Lee. I mean, it's a reoccurring theme. I always say that disaster is the church's finest hour because it's the very thing that rallies a community together. And not only do church people and believers, Christians go to church, but it's the first time in a pastor's life and a church's life they see that sinners line up by the droves. People who don't believe in Christ, they line up. So it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or non-Christian, they recognize that the place of shelter, the place of safety, the place of love, and the place of provision is a church. And so it's just really rewarding as a Christian leader to go in and work with the churches and help them succeed at helping their community.
Well, I was going to ask you, Mike, what motivates you all to do this kind of work? But hearing what you just said, I think answers that question. Is that your response as well, Mike?
Absolutely. To add to that, it's what we're called to do as followers of Christ, is continue the work that Christ came. In John, he says 3 times right around the time of the cross and the resurrection, the work that I was sent to do, so now I send you. And it's obedience, but it's joy to see in the midst of crisis, God. You know, and we see that so much in scriptures and the Psalms. And many times, you know, we see people in crisis situations, and I often wonder, what do they have if they don't have God? But with God, we count it as joy because we're not stuck with the circumstance. What we have is real. That hope is certain that God's going to move.
I guess they turn to God because, Jody, they have no place else to turn. They have come to the end of themselves, I guess, in disasters like Hurricane Katrina. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that always resounds in my heart is the scripture that says eternity is placed in the heart of man. And, you know, we can try to figure out all the natural reasons why people are drawn to churches and places where the Lord resides, but I believe it's because His presence draws them, and they see, non-believers see something special in Christians. They see a hope, they see a love, and they're drawn to that. And they know that where I can get safety, where I can get help is the knocking on the church's door. And I think that's just one of the greatest rewards of disaster relief is just being able to help those churches reach out to their community.
Mike, when did you start doing this work?
Right after 9/11, Franklin saw that the church, nor just the community at large, was really prepared to come alongside a large catastrophe. Right. And so there was a group of us, 3 of us, that were tasked with understanding how to blend the biblical and the clinical to come alongside appropriately to people in pain. And to then, again, use that word appropriately, share the gospel in a context where they were looking for hope, they needed hope, and that hope's in Christ Jesus.
Jody, as you reflect back on the first disaster that you responded to in your capacity with Operation Blessing, and where you are now as the leader of this, as one of the leaders of this organization, what have you learned over those years that have made you better at your job?
That would absolutely take hours and hours to say, but if I could say one of the greatest strategies we take and one of the greatest lessons I've learned is to come in and say, ask the officials, ask the church leaders, what is the greatest need and how can we help meet that need, instead of coming in with all of our professionalism and say, we have kitchens, we have this, we have that, but just coming in a servant heart and saying, what is the greatest need and how can we help meet that need? And that's what makes Operation Blessing shine, and most importantly, the kingdom of God during disasters.
I would think they respond well to that approach. Is that right?
Absolutely. God's given us tremendous favor, not only on local levels, state and federal levels, just by having that approach is how can we serve and what's the greatest need. And we're doing it today in Japan, we're doing it all around the world, in addition to here at home. Yeah,
that's the thing that amazes me. I was impressed by the fact that Operation Blessing, for example, had no infrastructure in Japan, yet that David Darg of your staff was there within a matter of hours and doing whatever he could. And Mike, I'm sure in your organization that you're responding to situations where you have no infrastructure. How do you get things done?
There is an infrastructure. It's called the church, and that church is worldwide. And for us at BGEA, we happen to have, or God happened to position, one of our festival directors living in Japan who was a part of the initial team that created the rapid response team. And so living on the ground just several hours from the epicenter was somebody who understood the crux of what we do and was on scene immediately because they actually lived there. Their family was there. And the thing about this, God's always surprising to us, but nothing ever gets by Him. And the thing I've learned is the sufficiency of Christ. He's amazing. Mm-hmm. And wherever we go in, I was training pastors in Haiti to help their congregations understand some of the processes that God has naturally created within us and how to respond and how to talk to those who are outside of their faith community. And one of the pastors said, but you don't understand, we don't have anything to give us or give them, so they'll listen to us. And I said, well, is Christ sufficient? He said, well, yes, but you don't understand. And so we went to Acts. What did Peter and John have?
Not a thing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But what I have, Christ, they gave to the man who was crippled, and a healing resulted, and Christ is sufficient.
Right. Yeah. It seems like many times to mourn with those who mourn. Tears, if that's all you have,
yeah.
that's a good thing.
Just the ministry of presence.
What's the one anecdote in your years with Operation Blessing, Jody, that has stuck with you? What's the one story that you tend to share with family and friends?
When I was even thinking about as I was sitting waiting to come on air was a story that happened in Lady Lake, Florida, as I was meeting a single mom who had just came back from the mortuary. And she just got back from identifying her husband and one of her 2 boys. And when she walked up, her collarbone was sticking out. She was in tears, broken to pieces. And yeah, we were there with heavy equipment to help her clear her land and begin to rebuild. But the greatest gift we had that day was just to give her the love and the comfort of Jesus. And I'll never forget the experience of wrapping my arms around that lady. And you know, well, maybe not the largest disaster ever, but it was the most powerful moment for me.
And all you had to give her was a hug at that point.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what she needed.
Yeah. Jody and Mike, thank you for your ministry and for imitating Christ in the way you do. We appreciate it. Mike, you mentioned 9/11. The Reverend Tim Keller, who is the pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan, had to preach a sermon the Sunday after 9/11. We're going to talk about that with him next.
We asked CBN.com users how we could make our website easier to use, and we listened.
This is really easy to read and move through.
The information opens up a whole lot quicker.
Yeah, it's much faster. There's everything I'm interested in right here. The click of a mouse.
The new CBN.com has been redesigned, making it faster to find your favorite 700 Club stories, musical guests, our online community, and special features.
Anyone can enjoy this new site.
Visit the new CBN.com today.
Hi, I'm Gordon Robertson. Jesus told us that if we have faith, we can speak to the mountain and it will move. Are there mountains in your life that you're currently facing? How do you break through the limits of your faith and see the miracles God has promised you in His Word? My father and I have put together a special teaching, The Law of Expectation. In it, you'll discover how to train your heart and mind to expect great things.
In this latest DVD, The Law of Expectation, Pat and Gordon Robertson bring you powerful principles of thought and behavior that can transform your life. You'll discover the power of expectations in your life, how to break through the limits of your faith, and what it means to agree with God and receive His favor and abundance.
Get the Law of Expectation and learn to expect and experience the wonderful blessings God has for you.
I was always on the cusp of exploding. So I figured out if I get rid of the wife and the kids, then I can just send them money. Went to the junk drawer, got the Bible out, put the tape in, and I believe that moment, Christ made sense. There is no earthly reason why we're still married. It is a divine intervention, and I thank God, and showing me what love, grace, and forgiveness looks like.
Joining me now via Skype is Dr. Timothy Keller, senior pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. Redeemer is not far from where the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, and the church played a vital role in responding with compassion to that tragedy. Tim, I went back and listened to your sermon the Sunday following 9/11, and I certainly can't imagine a more difficult challenge than to preach that day. But share with us what you wanted your congregation to hear that day.
I preached on John chapter 11, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And of course, it's a time of great grief, and he has two sisters, Mary and Martha. And when Martha comes out, she says, "Lord, if you had been here, he would never have died." And then Jesus actually says, "I am the resurrection and the life, and he who comes to the Father through me." Anyway, so he goes on and he gives her truth. He gives her teaching. Then Mary comes up and says the very same thing. Says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. It says almost the same words. And we're told that all Jesus did was weep. Didn't say anything to Mary, just wept. And what I was trying to get across there is that there's a single pathway through suffering and tragedy. That you need truth, you need sympathy and love, but you don't necessarily, every person is different. You don't necessarily need them in the same order, at the same time. And there's no one way to get through it. It's almost like suffering is like a set of mountains, and everybody has to find their own pathway through it.
It's easy to assign credit to God when good things happen in our life. And let me be the first to admit that I'm the first one to do that, but I'm also the first to find it difficult to see God's hand in seemingly bad circumstances. But it seems to me that it might be just as important to see God there as well, correct?
I think you need to say, I know there are reasons for this, but I shouldn't expect, even in this life, to necessarily know what they are. If God is nice enough to show me what they are, that would be great. So I do think you need to assume that they're there and that you need to trust God for them, but not necessarily insist that you see them or try to figure them all out. That would be pretty bad.
Your latest book, The King's Cross, touches on some of these same themes. Talk about that, if you will.
Well, Jesus is the ultimate example, I think, of this. Can you imagine if you're following Jesus, you're seeing him heal people, raise people from the dead? I think somebody said that death and disease was probably banished from that part of Palestine for a couple of years. I mean, he did so much. He looks like he's the one who's going to unify the people. He's clearly from God, and now he's dying on the cross. I mean, after a kangaroo, court, convicts him. So you're standing there, and here's what I think modern people would say. You would say, I can't see how God could bring any good out of this. And I can imagine people going home that night, looking at the most wonderful piece of God's salvation, the most wonderful expression of God's wisdom, the cross, in the history of the world, and yet because they couldn't fit it into their little thinking, they go home and they lose their faith. They say, I guess I can't believe in God. Why would he let something like this happen? See, we know why God let Jesus die. And nobody questions that because we've got the whole story. The real question is, why did God let this or that happen to you? And we don't have the book. We don't have the whole story. But Jesus is a perfect example of the fact that there is a story. And if we don't have it, it doesn't mean that there isn't one.
Dr. Tim Keller, thank you for talking to us and providing these insights. We appreciate it.
Let Superbook take your kids on an amazing adventure. Back to the beginning of time.
Then God said, let there be light.
Come explore with Chris.
Anything I can do to help?
Joy.
Where are we?
And Gizmo.
I am too scared to look.
As they experience the wonder of creation.
We call this Eden.
Encounter temptation.
Chris, do not do it!
And learn important truths from the Bible. For your gift of $25 or more, you'll receive a special edition of Superbook's newest DVD. In the beginning, Superbook trading cards, and help fund future Superbook episodes.
It's amazing.
Give the kids you love a gift they'll watch over and over. Superbook. It's super power for super kids.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy?
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
Christian World News, your window to the global church. For stories of revival,
another revival,
persecution,
funeral, relatives and fellow Christians mourn his
first country over the international date line.
I'm George Thomas in Baghdad, and coming up on the broadcast, an exclusive interview.
And the impact of Christian leaders. Watch Christian World News.
Welcome back. You know, I began this program by reading a portion of Psalm 148, and let me close with the encouraging words found in Psalm 145. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and loving toward all he has made. The Lord is near to all who call on him, in truth. You know, a lot of folks are wondering, as you've been watching this program and the interviews we've done with so-called professionals from the disaster relief organizations like Operation Blessing and Billy Graham's organization, and you're wondering, what can I do? Well, I think praying certainly is a big thing, but I think just rolling up our sleeves and being there and offering all that we can, that involves prayer and many times just a hug, as Jody talked about, or your tears. That's all for this special edition of Christian World News. George Thomas and Wendy Griffith will be back next week. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.